Hi, and a very big welcome to Reset 2020. This is a program developed by the X Factor Collective in partnership with Equity Trustees. Today, you're going to be hearing our case study, and that's what we've edited here for you. You can also watch the full recording. Our case study today features Patrick Walker, the CEO of Australian Sports Foundation, joined by two of our recruitment specialists, Michelle Varcoe and Rachael McLennan, who are pre-vetted specialist members of the X Factor Collective. Our topic for Live Show 6 has all been about recruitment, staffing and talent, the challenges and the opportunities at this most unusual time. We look forward to sharing all of this knowledge with you and jump right in and enjoy. Delighted to have two of our specialist business members from the X Factor Collective here today. Michelle, give us a wave, and Rachael McLennan, welcome. And Patrick Walker, the CEO of Australian Sports Foundation. Great to have you here. So. Let's jump into it, everyone. There's so much. I'm so excited about the conversation we're about to have. But before we do, Patrick, can you give us a bit of an introduction about the Australian Sports Foundation? Can you tell us a bit about your role as an organisation and your purpose, and a brief overview for those that don't know the size of the organisation, a bit of an idea of the structure and size of the organisation?
Yeah, no problem. I guess the best way to think of us is Australia's national sports charity. Now, one of the things, sport hasn't traditionally been seen as a charitable or philanthropic cause. And that's certainly something that we're on a mission to change, because we think that really undervalues or misses the value that sport provides to communities. You know, the really positive impact it has on physical fitness, physical health, mental health, and the power it has to bring people together and bring communities together. So we think it's a fundamental part of Australian life and life all over the world. And I guess if I wanted to summarize our mission, our mission is that everybody in Australia, regardless of background, ability or culture, should be able to access the benefits of sport. So that's what we're all about. We fulfill that mission really through three core activities. The first is we work with community sports clubs all over Australia, partnering with them on community fundraising. And the benefit of working with the Australian Sports Foundation is that people who make a donation in support of their local club through the Sports Foundation can claim a tax deduction. That's a unique benefit. So sort of think of us as a GoFundMe for sport with the benefit of a tax deduction. Secondly, and this is a part of our business we're growing, we raise money ourselves from the philanthropic community, and we invested in areas that we think are particularly socially important. So to give you an example, active kids. Our kids are now ranked 140th out of 146 nations for levels of physical activity. So Australia is no longer an outdoor active nation. It's one of the most sedentary inactive nations on earth. If you look at any marginalised group, social disadvantage, Indigenous, migrant, older Australians, LGBTI community, they all have less access to sport. And we want to change that. And women and girls participate in sport at half the rate of men and boys, and it has a very positive impact on confidence, self-esteem, academic career outcomes for women. So we want to change that also. So raising funds for that. And third is a little bit of what I've just done, which is advocating for the social benefits of sport, because people, I don't think, connect sport. It's not what happens on the pitch. It's the whole thing that goes around physical, mental health and community. In terms of size, we raise between $40 and $45 million a year, which we think woefully undervalues the social importance of sport, and we want to grow that. And we have about 18 people, if you factor in part-time, there's sort of 16 and a half FTE. So we're relatively small and growing our impact.
Yeah, beautiful. Excellent. And we'll pick up on the notion that you just said then about some of the priorities of the new areas for the organisation this year, because you've been gearing up for that pre all of these disasters that have hit us. In terms of, we'll come back and look closely at the foundation shortly, but you have a very unique position in terms of what you're seeing in the wider environment, right across the landscape from professional sport through to grassroots sport. Sport's probably one of those areas that's been dealt a very cruel hand first by the bushfires and floods and then now COVID-19. Can you tell us what you're seeing in terms of the direct impacts on people employed and working across the sports sector?
Yeah, it's really quite devastating, whichever level you look at. So to give an example, at the professional end of sport, almost every professional club in Australia has stood down at least 20% of their staff. Their TV money's reduced, sponsorship money's dried up, no match day revenue. Really, virtually every source of revenue has stopped, and 80% of all staff across professional sport have been stood down, as I say. You look at the national level, two things I want to highlight here. Tokyo Olympics has been postponed. The vast majority of our athletes who were preparing for Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics, have been on a 4-year cycle. They were gearing up to peak for July. One of my team is a Paralympic gold medal winner. He'd taken sabbatical. He was ready to give it his last crack. He's pushing his mid-30s. This is going to be his last Paralympic Games. The deferral of a year has completely disrupted that cycle. And, he'll be another year older at that stage. I hate to say, I hope he's not watching this. He may not be, quite as in a position to win gold as he would have been this year. So that impact. This morning we heard Equestrian Australia, which is the national sporting body for equestrian sports, has gone into voluntary administration. Equestrian is a sport that's won 9 Olympic golds for Australia in recent years, and combination of pressure on government funding and COVID has caused them to go into administration. So national level, devastating. But I guess where we're most concerned, where we've been doing most work, is community sport. Now, people might think, well, how come community sports suffering? It's volunteer run, they're amateurs, they've got very little in the way of cost. We're currently running a survey across community sports to understand the impact on their clubs. And again, at that level, picture is truly devastating and shocking. 80% of clubs are reporting income from sponsorship has declined or ceased. So who sponsors local sport? It's local pubs, clubs, cafes, restaurants that have been hit hard. All the winter sports haven't collected their membership revenue, which is the bulk of their membership revenue, and they may not do so, or it may be vastly reduced. Local fundraising has virtually stopped. You can't run a sausage sizzle, you can't do a Friday night meat raffle, but they've got ongoing costs, utilities, rent, maintenance, etc. So the shocking statistic is that 1/3 of the clubs we've surveyed say they will have to close their doors within 6 months if that picture doesn't change. And, coming back to what I said earlier, that's not just the loss of a club, that's the loss of social capital, that's the loss of community and social cohesion. It's not just the participants, it's the volunteers. 3 million Australians volunteer in sport. They're often in the older generation. There's a big concern that they are worried about health and hygiene issues returning at the moment. And so Australia's army of sports volunteers may be lost. So this is truly a national crisis. We think a physical and mental health crisis, and a crisis affecting our communities. If anybody's interested in finding out more, please tune in to ABC's 7:30 program tonight, which is, unless there's a global disaster, program's going out tonight, featuring some interim results from the survey and interviewing some of our clubs that have completed the survey to hear their story and possibly a few words from me as well. So it's a really devastating issue, and the thought that 1/3 of our community clubs could go under without help is one that should concern everybody.
Absolutely. I feel like we could continue talking just about that for the rest of the show. It feels rude to deviate from something so important. And thank you for mentioning that it is on 7:30 report tonight, and we'll be doing what we can as well to help get the word out about the campaign that's going to be coming out off the back of that. How can we actually save our clubs? And thank you for sharing that with us, Patrick. Let's come back a bit closer to home and talk about the Australian Sports Foundation as an organisation. In our lead up to today, you've sort of mentioned that you've been in a fairly unique and strong position as an organisation. And I was just wondering if you might be able to shed some light on that for people listening in today and people watching the recording thereafter. What has it meant for you as an organisation?
Yeah, look, a bit of background, and I wanted to pick up on something Rachael said earlier. I'm also a corporate refugee, so my background is running a business. And although, of course, the Sports Foundation is a not-for-profit, I run it as a business because I know the importance of being in a financially strong position. First of all, profits aren't, or surpluses aren't important in themselves. They're about how you can make more of an impact and fulfill your mission more effectively. And also they protect you against shocks to the economy, shocks to the system. We don't receive any recurring government funding. All our revenue is self-generated. So it was important to me that we were in a reasonably strong position. And when this particular crisis hit, we were in a good position that we had sufficient reserves to run the organization for 12 months on the basis that we would have $0 of revenue and that costs would remain the same. Now, the reality is neither of those things were ever going to happen. We expected a revenue decline, but obviously that having that sort of cushion enabled us to not make any panicked decisions, but to make rational decisions, to again pick up on one of the points mentioned earlier, rational decisions, and also decisions that were strategic and reacted to the situation. And one of the things I just want to talk about, that being in that position enabled us to think strategically. One important saying that I sort of live by at the moment is that a crisis is an opportunity riding a dangerous wind. So clearly this is a crisis. Clearly there are dangers for any organization, including our own, but there are opportunities, and it's just a question of identifying those opportunities and being in a position clearly to leverage them, which is what we're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that you mentioned in the last week was around travel, and the travel component just of your organisation had been significant. And these were the sorts of things that you were starting to see in terms of how you're looking at the business and the organisation and reshaping it. Can you go into a couple of those areas for us?
Yeah, look, probably a couple of big areas are going to change the way we do business. I mean, first of all, like everybody, we went overnight to remote working. It's been completely seamless. The collaboration and team spirit and support is as strong or stronger as it's ever been. We've launched and coordinated the most complicated project we've ever done without a single face-to-face meeting, all through the wonderful power of Zoom and its equivalents. So it's really demonstrated that the old way of doing business doesn't have to maintain. Most of our staff have loved working from home, and most don't want to go back to a 9-to-5 fixed office environment. So one of the things that will be happening, we've already gone down from 3 physical offices down to 1, and we originally were thinking of expanding our main head office to cope with increased staff. We won't do that. We may look even for smaller, more flexible office. So that's certainly reduced costs and it implemented a more flexible way of working. Second thing, we did a huge amount of travel. I mean, I've the older generation, I've had a strong belief that business is done face-to-face and relationships are built face-to-face. And, that permeated through the organization. We probably spend $150,000 a year on interstate travel, being with our sports, being with our donors, etc. I think there's still an important role for that, but I'd expect it to come down by 2/3 at least to around 50,000 a year. And, again, we've built relationships and held meetings over video conference that have been just as effective as face-to-face. And you add the productivity gains of not sitting in an airport lounge and so on. And I think there's benefits for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Let's talk about your internal team and your team members. What have been some of the changes that you've made with team member roles, and what have been some of the impacts on your team?
Well, one of the big impacts has been, not being able to do business in the old way and having to make more phone calls and hold more video meetings. That's certainly been one big impact. The other thing we found is really some of the old demarcations have become a lot more blurred. Because what we need to do and how we need to do it is changing. It isn't as easy to pigeonhole. And we found that really some parts of the business or team have a bit of excess capacity and some are really under the pump. And people have chipped in and really worked across different areas in a way that they hadn't done previously. And I think they've brought fresh skills and fresh insights and fresh perspectives to some of those roles. And I think we as an organization have gained, immeasurably from that. So I think going forward, we certainly need to invest more in technology resources, but also technology skilled technology operators and digital specialists. I think that's one thing that this change is definitely driven. But I think more flexibility, more adaptability, resilience are key skills we're going to be looking for, whatever the core professional skill of the individual concerned.
Yeah, great. Excellent. We'll jump into some more on skills, and Rachel and Michelle are going to comment on that because there's definitely some changes they're seeing across the sector. Before we jump into that, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was, and I have a little bit of inside knowledge because we get to work with the Australian Sports Foundation at the Collective. But, you know, over the last 12, 18 months, that whole being the national charity for sport has been this massive, big area of development for the organisation. And you've been recruiting new roles to support that growth in partnerships and philanthropy, with a fairly new team coming together over the last 6 months, looking at some key strategic goals together. Can you tell us about that, you know, having that big momentum and that big lead up? How are you managing the balance and the change that's now occurred?
Yeah, great question. Look, we're managing it through having a shared vision that everybody buys into. You know, the team really care to a person. They really care about what the mission we're trying to achieve. They all know the power of sport. They get the power of sport through their own engagement or that of their kids, and they care about us making a difference and an impact. So that is a great base to start from. And I'll say that's a prerequisite of bringing anybody into the team. If you don't care about the mission, then, you know, whatever your skills, you're better off working somewhere else. So that's a really key thing. You know, secondly, everybody's bought into the ambition of the organization, that we're not just here to do what we did last year plus 5%. We're here to, sounds grandiose, we're here to change the face of philanthropy in sport and to change the funding model for sport at all levels. And that ambition excites people. The key to bringing on those new people in through this particular time is first of all selecting the right people. Yeah, that's like all of life becomes better if you've got the right people in your team. But secondly, really clear and regular communication and really good collaboration across different elements of the team. And the interesting thing for me has been that this change to remote working has not hindered that whatsoever. In fact, it's probably tighter and better than it's ever been in my organization.
Yeah, great. So just coming back into skills and picking up on the changes there as well, because you've sort of recruited for these big, you know, campaign goals for the year, and then COVID's hit and things are sort of in a state of slight flux and change. Thinking about that and then thinking about the skills that you see that the organisation needs over the next 12 months. Can you go into a little bit around skills and how that's changing for you as an organisation?
Yeah, look, I think, so I'll give you a couple of examples. I mean, core skills that we're going to need to grow the growth areas of our business: more fundraising capability, more philanthropy experience and skills. We're also looking at bringing greater advocacy and communication skills into the team to help us, you know, promote the mission and the social benefits of sport more effectively. So those are really growth areas for the business. Then if I think about the sort of the core partnerships role, which is really our people who help sports with their fundraising campaigns and guide them, provide them with tools and resources. You know, we've got 5 or 6 of those people around the country. This survey process we have done, part of the survey, one of the options was, would you like us to contact you to help? And 2,000 new clubs have said, yes, please. So 5 people cannot phone 2,000 clubs and have a one-on-one relationship. So we've got to think very smartly about use of webinars, use of other digital techniques to work more effectively with hundreds of clubs at a time. So we're still looking for the same core knowledge of sport, knowledge of fundraising and philanthropy, but we are looking for people who can work digitally very comfortably, are very comfortable communicating through webinars and so on and so forth. So it's changing the emphasis on the skill set of the people that we bring into those roles. Great,
excellent. At this point, Rachel and Michelle, before you freeze over, sitting there beautifully, give it all a bit of a shake around, I'll get you to share some of what you're seeing as well, because this is something that you're noticing out there talking with organisations every day, and also people that are job hunting. to comment on that area of skills. Rachel, kicking off with you first, what do you notice? You do a lot of recruiting in leadership roles, helping organisations find the perfect CEO. What are you noticing in that area?
Well, actually, it's interesting because it comes back to what Patrick just said. And we have a saying here at People for Purpose, Patrick, we don't care what you know until we know you care. And to Michelle's point about 3 times as many applications, you know, we might get 150 applications for a, you know, commercial sort of CEO role, but the individual who's applying has incredible skills and talents, and they haven't talked to us at all about why they care about the organisation. And it's really interesting too. I see this kind of juxtaposition of requiring really strong people skills to be able to build relationships with donors and funders and other team members virtually, and really strong kind of tech and kind of comms skills, digital skills. And I think, you know, we talked about this when we were having chats, us four, prior to today, and I think Patrick had a really great saying about exposure. It is exposing individuals and organisations is what I'm seeing, and that can be good and bad. So, you know, you talk about a fundraising capability. It's come back to its bare bones. Just to pick up the phone, to call the donors, to thank them and tell them what you're doing in this time has had exponential quality improvements to relationships and funding. And to not do that would expose, you know, a fundraiser that may not have those kinds of personal skills. So, you know, I think we're seeing a lot of what Patrick's talking about, this requirement for skills that is, how do we communicate well using technology that's different? And, you know, how can we draw on other people within our business that might have those skills that might be able to help, and stop looking across lines, you know, look deep into the organisation, because you might find, you know, people who can add value to that.
Rachel, picking up on, you do a lot of recruitment of working with CEOs and leaders and boards. What are you noticing in terms of conversations with boards and directors around what sort of capabilities they're looking for within their leaders now?
Yeah, look, the board one is a really funny space, and they've gone a little bit quiet, to be honest, because I think they have realised, to the exposure point, I think a lot of non-executive directors have realised that this is really serious. And to Patrick's point earlier, you know, profit is not distributing profit to shareholders. It's not, we're not allowed to make a profit. So if you as a board haven't maintained strength in terms of your financial position, then you might not look like a particularly good governor at this point in time. So I would expect, and I don't think we've seen it yet, but I would expect that some directors might be bowing out of their roles as non-executives, which gives the board an opportunity, to the point I made earlier about structure following strategy, to reevaluate where they're headed, and not only put people in their executive teams that can support the new strategy, but on the board as well. So I would expect that there will be change in the non-exec space as well, but I don't think we're quite seeing it yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And Michelle, in your work, you have a lot to do in the fundraising and the development area specifically, and brilliant in this area. Can you tell us what you're seeing across that area in terms of skills, changes, what people are looking for?
Yeah, definitely. And I think fundraisers are sort of caught in the headlights a little bit because there's a decline in funding. So the executives come to the fundraisers and say, look, step it up, we need more funding. So the fundraisers are under a lot of pressure at the moment. So the different skills are looking at digital platforms. How do we do like giving days? I've seen so many extra giving days. Also emergency appeals, the campaigns, there's a lot of that happening at the moment, and adding expertise to raise money quickly, tap into donors and engage with them. So engaging through webinars, through Zoom meetings, through tours, through different engaging events that show stories, show the impact, and really connect donors to their cause. Some organisations have tours and they bring donors around and this is what we're doing. You can't do that as much anymore. So it's doing it digitally in a different way. So those extra skills. And the other area I'm seeing is in training. So looking at platforms to do training for volunteers, training to deliver curriculum. It could be support programs for organisations in the health space. So it's very much around digital skills and engagement skills.
I think, sorry to jump in, but I think too it's worth mentioning also that what we're talking about, people and digital, really relies to the work that Michelle and I do in terms of recruiting, and that's onboarding and kind of offboarding. You know, we're seeing lots of creative ways too, where you might have a digital buddy that you hadn't had. If you're a new team member or you've just been appointed, you know, maybe a digital buddy, or that might not be, you know, directly connected with you and your work, but just someone in the business that can tell you what it's like in the business and just check in. I think too, you know, if you've had people just join the business, to share some of the comms that's come from the leaders is really useful. They can see that you know, they've just joined, they're not in an office, they're not with people, but to read an email from the CEO about how they're managing this time is really good. And I think offboarding as well, and I think Michelle's possibly worked in this space a little more, but just again, a video message from someone to say, look, the times are really tough and we don't want to lose you, but we're going to have to. And, you know, a personal message that's sent by video using technology. There's lots of things, lots of implications for the way we actually do recruitment. Testing, because we can't interview, things like this are really important in terms of these processes.
Yeah, fantastic. And we're going to jump into a little bit more of that as well shortly, and deep dive into some of those areas around onboarding and offboarding as well. Let's jump back into our conversation here with Australian Sports Foundation. Thanks for sharing that on skills, and we're going to cut some of these little bits up so people can just watch that back, just that little bit around skills. Certainly something that's a hot topic right now. Patrick, next we want to talk about something, and this was very much on the packaging for the show. So we want to spend some time here now talking about what it's like being an organisation that receives a high volume of job applications. You've had this for many, many years. I call you the Google of the sector. Everyone wants to work with you, but you really have a lot of lived experience in this space. And one of the things that we've been trying to do with Reset 2020 is pull out where people already have a lived experience of something that we're going to see more of over the next 6 to 12 months. So could you tell us a little bit about what that's like for your organisation? And then after that, let's talk about what measures that you put in place to support the process to handle being inundated.
Yeah. Well, look, I have to say, first of all, it took me by surprise. So when I first joined the organisation and, you know, first put something up on Seek or Indeed or one of those just for a fairly basic administrative role, wasn't expecting to get 100 or 150 applications, wasn't ready to handle it. And it caused us a bit of consternation internally to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And the reason I think it's so important, and again, it comes back to something Michelle and Rachel have just been talking about. Everybody who touches your organization, you know, you want them to leave that experience as an advocate for your organization, whether it's a member of staff who moves on, you want them to be advocating positively for you, member of the board, or someone who applies for a role and 99% of the applicants won't get the role. So you still want all those 99 or 100 people to think good of you. And I have to say, hand on heart, first time we did that, we weren't ready for that. And we were a bit ad hoc with our communications and took us much longer to get back to people than we should have done. Once bitten, twice shy. So then we've really focused ever since on being ready to deal with you know, a large number of applications. When we've handled recruitment internally, it's about having people ready to vet the applications, ready to sort of produce a short list for the executive to review, knowing the sort of person and the skills you're looking for. It's about pre-preparing communications because, you know, obviously with that number of applications, a lot of people won't get it. So having a nice email that's personally sent out from me to the applicant saying, you know, thank you, very strong list of candidates. Unfortunately, you haven't made it, but wish you the best type messaging. And then obviously, once you get to shortlisting, I've always made it my practice to personally call unsuccessful applicants and explain what we felt they did very well and why we selected another candidate. So they got some value out of it. It's quite time consuming, but it's still important for the reasons I say. How we're now handling it, particularly with our key roles, is working with an outsourced provider who bring a lot of benefits, not least being professionally set up to manage all of those touch points and that experience in a way that reflects the organization positively and is pretty much guaranteed to leave the unsuccessful candidate feeling positive about the experience. So that's where we're at the moment.
Yeah. Michelle and Rachel, just in terms of the organisations that receive a lot of job applications, and just to sort of like put some clarity around this for people who might have different experiences out there, is there kind of an average number of applications that an organisation might get? Do you know, is there sort of like a 50 or 40, or is there sort of like a number at all in terms of what people might get for different roles? putting you on the spot.
I can go first if you like. I mean, some positions generally would only receive 1 or 2 applications, and that's it. And it becomes more of a search process. So you're actively tapping people on the shoulder. And other positions like the Sports Foundation, which I worked with very closely with Patrick to appoint a corporate partnerships manager. That position received over 100 applications. And the key pull was, yes, working with Patrick and the Sports Foundation, but being involved in sport. So some of them receive volume. So it really depends on the positions. So some positions are quite niche, and so there's not as many candidates. But at the moment, most positions, there was one I did recently, I would have expected maybe 10, 15 applications at the most. I received at least 4 times that. So it's definitely higher, but yeah, some positions, they just don't attract enough candidates, so you do have to hunt them down. And major gifts in fundraising, that would be one of those, particularly last year when it was a candidate short market. People who are doing really well in fundraising don't want to leave. They've got their structures, they've got their donors, they've got their rungs on the board, so they don't want to leave. They're not actively applying, so it's done in a different way. So some positions attract a lot and some positions don't, but generally it's a lot more for every position at the moment.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Michelle, can you take us through in terms of some of the steps that you help organisations put in place where they are inundated with job applications? Can you take us through, and maybe even using the Sports Foundation there as an example with that corporate partnerships role, over 100 applications, what are the steps in the process that other organisations can learn from that?
I think, first of all, making it easy for people to pick up the phone and ask questions. So like some people just shoot across an application. There's no context. There's no, with the Sports Foundation, I couldn't see any relevance to sport, any commitment to sport in some people's applications, and that's really core to that position. So initially, I make it really easy for people to call, pick up the phone and say, look, I'm applying for this position, and just ask some questions, see a position description before they even apply, and that gets some of the applications down as well. We can have a conversation, rule some people out. Then going through applications, there was a quote that I saw that, or a stat that I saw, that it takes 8 seconds to look at an application. So, I mean, I like to think that I take a little bit longer than that, but going through those applications, we're looking for key things. So in that case, we're looking at philanthropy experience, fundraising experience, sponsorship experience, and some sort of connection to sport through either their application letter or their CV. So looking at those things, and then we're evaluating against the criteria for the position and the person. So, and refugees can come across. There is left of field candidates that can transition their skills too. So with the volume, it is looking at, okay, where do I prioritise my time in terms of the candidates that I'm booking in for interview, and the candidates that won't get an interview but might get a phone call. Look, you've got great experience, unfortunately you don't have this, this and this, and this is crucial. Or picking up the phone and saying, look, I can see you've got great application, but this is really in sport, where's your connection? And just asking that question and ruling people in or out to get to a shorter number that you can focus on. So that's one of the key things. And in this case, we had, I think I interviewed probably about 30 people. Some people were already connected to the Australian Sports Foundation, so they had a connection, they had a link, they understood, had potentially worked in a similar role or sponsorship of a sports club and wanting to transition into philanthropy. So that was quite difficult because they've got that connection and they really want the job. So we did meet with some people who were connected with the community to give them a chance and to go through, okay, you do have some potential here and it could work. And then we went down to narrow that down to a shorter list. So because that position could be anywhere, ASF is very flexible, so it could be Melbourne or Sydney. So we did look in both places, and we had 2 shortlists at the end. So we kept on narrowing it down and narrowing it down. And once we got to the shortlist, that was a time when I met with Patrick and said, okay, this is our potential of really good candidates, and it was quite a long list. So what are your thoughts? This is where it is, and we were narrowing it down together. So they obviously know the organisation a lot better than what I did. So working through, okay, what is missing in your team? These meet the criteria, but this is where their background could really add value. So I worked very closely with Patrick on narrowing that down. And then we got further and further through the process, right through to offer stage. And I remember it was very close. There was like all the candidates, after meeting Patrick and going through the process, really wanted the position. So then it was going through that offer stage. And as Patrick mentioned, every person that we met with did get a personal phone call from myself, and also we sent an email that was drafted from Patrick. So everyone got I guess that bad news that no, they weren't successful. So, I mean, for me, I felt like I was crushing some people's dreams because they really wanted to work with Patrick and make a contribution to the sport. But going through that process, it was to make sure that people felt heard, their application was reviewed, and then if they did go to the next step, what was that, and managing the expectations along the way.
Yeah, beautiful, fantastic. And that's a nice segue, talking about that in terms of crushing people's dreams, but a nice segue in terms of some of the things that we're experiencing now is people that haven't been from as the talent side, people that are job hunting, looking for new roles, potentially being in situations that they haven't been in before as well. Rachael, can you speak to us a little bit from that side of it, from the talent perspective? One of the things that I love that we've talked about this week is around that mental health, and where we need to be really mindful and respectful around some of those steps from a mental health perspective. Can you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, and I think Patrick and Michelle have touched on this too. Well, I think you absolutely will need to allow more time when you're like bringing new staff on at the moment. And that does talk to what you've just asked, Julia. You know, it might be that you receive a lot of applications for a role where you may have people who have just thrown their application letter in because they're really, really desperate for a job. And you may, we tend to look at the application letters before we look at the CVs, unlike a lot of recruiters in other sectors. So you might find something that you feel has potential, but they haven't talked about the Australian Sports Foundation. And when you ring them up, they talk about their dad being a netball coach for 100 years and their mum running whatever club. And you think, gosh, why didn't you put this in your application letter? And so to Michelle's point about giving them the time to call, sometimes you have to make extra time to call an extra number of people to find out about the purpose piece, especially for the corporate refugees who aren't used to talking about why they care about a particular organisation but have great skills. It does take a little bit of time to uncover some of that too. I think too, being mindful, and I love that Patrick sends personal emails. I 100% agree with you, Patrick. Our responsibility is to represent an organisation's brand, because they could be a donor, they could be a future director, they could be whatever. And so to call them and to explain to them why, bearing in mind at the moment, you're going to make more of those calls, and the talent on the other side, to your question, Julia, they might have had 12 rejections that they're not used to having. And so being really mindful of the fact, and we might be getting to a point where we're absolutely splitting hairs. So, even the last 6 people for a CEO role could be absolutely perfect, but you are going to have to coach those people. The talent will want a little bit more coaching at this point in time. And I can totally understand. I can totally understand that. I think too, what we can't see, and I mentioned it before, are the personal and professional implications for everyone that are different. So for me, I was trying to homeschool kindergarten and grade 8, and my husband was working from home, and we still had jobs, and that was a really nice place to be, but everyone's trying to work at home and the Zoom's not working and blah, 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 blah. And that's different to the person next door who's watching Netflix and, quite happy to be out at work. So you're right. I think being really mindful that we can't see what someone else is experiencing, and therefore we're going to just have to make more time, make more space.
Yeah, beautiful. Patrick, we're going to start to wrap up, but your final gems and words of advice for leaders of organisations who haven't been through this before in terms of being inundated with applications, what would be your final advice in this area?
Well, I wanted to actually, if I can, just pick up on something that Rachael just said, and I think it's a very important advantage of the move we recently made, which is outsourcing and working with someone like Michelle or Rachael. when we've received 100+ applications for the role, if they haven't got a covering letter, or if the covering letter is to whom it may concern and it's just a standard covering letter, that's it, they're out. Because we haven't got the time to do what Rachel and Michelle do, which is phone up and say, you haven't touched on sport, you know, do you have any? Oh yeah, you know, I've done this and I've done that. Why didn't you put it in the letter? So going through a professional organization that has that expertise and time to dedicate to that role will get you more stronger candidates. So, you know, because of that reason that we just don't have the time to do it. If you're going to handle it yourself, then you, as I say, my only advice is you have to be prepared for it, and you have to sort of work out a process and a system that enables you to be reasonably efficient in the sifting process. Use other members of the team whose opinion you trust to sort of sort through the applications before you get to the shortlist. Be ready with tailored communications for the 99% who won't get on the shortlist, and make sure they feel as good or as least bad as they can do out of it. And then be prepared. And I do, you know, I make a personal point of calling everybody I personally interview to say yay or nay. And hopefully that's only 5 or 6, you know, if you've got the shortlist right.
Yeah.
But it's a good investment of time for the reasons I said. So you just got to be planned and strategic about it, and be ready to cope with the deluge.
Yeah, beautiful. Excellent. Rachel, Michelle, before we start to wrap up, what do you think are some of the key takeouts here from the things Patrick has said throughout the last half an hour? Put you totally on the spot.
I was just going to be polite, and I feel like I've just talked a lot. Michelle.
You go, Rachel, go.
Look, I think, you know, lots of great things. And I think, you know, without repeating it, I think the time, the personal, the patience, the understanding, you know, talents, pros and cons in terms of differences, different skills that might be coming up. I think the people that we have inside our businesses, the talent that we have inside our businesses now, we need to take the time to really understand how they can contribute in this point, or how they can be supported and managed, regardless of what direction they're heading with the business. And I think for new talent coming into, it's different. It's a little bit more time consuming. It does have personal touches that are delivered in a very different way. And same for the people being managed out. We just have to be. Patrick makes a really good point. I think even just to do something really practical and block the time in your diary to make the calls, to manage people in or out, or to conduct these processes. Like, you might just sort of stick it in before, whereas now there is more volume, there is more attention required. And so a practical tip would just be to, you know, diarise it.
Beautiful. And Michelle, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think Patrick made a lot of good points. And one thing I've noticed with working with Patrick is just he leads from the front. He does empower his staff. He communicates very effectively, and people know where they stand. So just managing expectations and considering people's skills, how they can adapt, how they can pivot and get involved in what's happening in the business, regardless if it's their role, people can make a contribution. So
yeah, absolutely.
Patrick.
Julia, sorry, can I just make one quick, because you asked me about non-executive directors before, and I think we can't forget them when it comes to talent. One thing in working with sometimes fundraising departments and sometimes even executive teams is some of them are a little bit nervous about approaching their non-executive directors, but I think now is the time to really step up and build or leverage those relationships, because it's not just the executives and the CEOs that need, and everyone in the business that needs to help navigate through this. It's the talent that sits on your board as well. And so now is the time to step up and say to the chair or someone, you know, on the board, you know, or you have a relationship with, I think we might need a little bit of extra support here. Or can you please share with us what you're thinking about there? But I think let's not forget the talent that's sitting at that boardroom table, because they have a lot to be offering at the moment too. And we shouldn't be afraid, shouldn't be shy in approaching them.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Rachel. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and taking us under the hood and behind the scenes of the Australian Sports Foundation today. We really do appreciate it. We look forward to jumping on 7:30 report tonight and seeing the coverage of the story, as sad as it indeed is, and look forward to hearing more about the campaign that you're going to be launching to fight back. So thank you very much. If everyone can just give a virtual round of applause to say thank you to Patrick, and we're just going to pop you off to the side and we'll catch up with you again soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Julia. Thanks to all your team at the X Factor Collective. Been a great help on our journey.
You're very welcome. Lovely working with you. All the best.